Good afternoon. My name is Brian Sharp. I'm with Lower Columbia College's Career and Employment Services, and today we'll be talking about interview essentials, or moving from an applicant to an employee. So, through the whole application process, you've done a lot of work, you've spent a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of nerves have gone on, and the whole purpose of everything you've done, from the resume to the application, has been about getting the interview. So finally the phone rings, and you get that call you've been waiting for. So what we're going to talk about today is, from the beginning stages to the time you get into the interview till the interview's over, what are some good pointers and tips that might help you succeed? So there we go. So we broke this up into three basic sections: before the interview, right leading up to the interview, and the interview and beyond. So before the interview, this is something hopefully you've done anyway. You want to research the company. Know what their mission statement is. Know hopefully who you're going to be talking to, and what kind of things are going to show your fit for that position and why you need to be that person that gets the call saying you're hired. The next thing you want to do, practice, practice, practice. Interviewing for almost everyone I've ever met is not a pleasant thing. It's something that takes practice. It takes a lot of practice, actually. And what you want to do is, we're going to talk about some pointers about common interview questions, how you should answer a question during this. And again, if you have any other questions, talk to somebody that's a professional. Talk to one of our career specialists here at the Career Center. Talk to somebody at WorkSource to get yourself prepared. You only get one chance to make this first impression, and you want to make sure you make it right. Another thing you want to do is know your resume. Unless you've made networking connections with this employer before, they're not going to know you. All they're going to know is this piece of paper that says, Brian Sharp, here are my skills and abilities, here's my work history, here's my education. Since that's all they're going to know of you, you want to make sure that you know what you wrote down, so that when you're talking, there's not a big disconnect. And that when you are speaking with them and answering questions, they're not going back and forth trying to figure out, well, which thing is right. Because the minute they start doing that, the minute they focus on anything but why you're qualified, they're losing why they should hire you. Another thing you want to do, and this is a very big one, is you want to clean up your online presence. Facebook, Twitter, all these things are great communication tools. They're great ways to network with people nowadays, but they're also sometimes your worst enemy when you're applying for a job. So when you're doing this, you want to really remember, go onto Facebook, make it private if you can. You want to make sure that if you have any kind of offensive posts, clean those things up. One thing I tell people is actually to Google themselves. Google your name, see what pops up. Sometimes people are very surprised by what does pop up. And a lot of employers, you can bet the first thing they're going to do is type your name into Google and see what pops up. And when they do that, you want to be relatively sure that what they're going to find is something that's going to make you look great. Not something with a picture of you in a compromising situation, not something where you made some kind of political rant, where you made some real inappropriate comment or posted some kind of video that's going to really look bad. Those things come back to bite you. And the other thing is, prepare for the call. Ask questions. This first call is actually a pre-interview. When they call you to tell you, we liked your resume, we liked your application materials, we'd like to interview you, this is where you want to really take that time to show your interests, show your fit, and really make them see that they do want to interview you. And so leading to that, one of the things, doing that research, we talked about that, you want to really figure out how you're going to present yourself, how you're going to make yourself look like that right fit. And I'll probably say that word a few more times because it really is important. Research the company by going to the company site. Learn what they're about. If they have a mission statement, know it and know how you can relate to that. If you can find out their values, what kind of products they serve, what kind of customer base they service. Those are all things that are going to help you prepare for that interview to answer those questions when they start asking about why you are a great fit and why we should hire you. LinkedIn.com and Glassdoor.com are also two excellent sites. LinkedIn is essentially, if you're not familiar with it, is essentially a professional Facebook. You come in, employers are there, people looking for jobs, professionals that are trying to build those connections. It's kind of like 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. It's something that's fairly old, but basically what that was about is if you know someone and you know a lot of someone's, those people that you know also know a lot of someone's, who in turn know a lot of someone's. You go out 5, 6, 7 separate degrees out of yourself, you know literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. Those networks can be great for getting yourself known, letting them know that we need to interview you. And Glassdoor is excellent for finding out about the company culture. If you go to their website, they're obviously going to tell you they're great, a place to work for. They're a good company. Glassdoor can kind of give you people that can give you some insight into what people have said about that company, about their interviewing process, about the jobs that they have there, a little bit of information from an outside source. Now, while you're preparing, and we're still in the before stage, what you want to think of is you want to assume they're going to call you. So when you're doing this, you want to go through here, make sure your voicemail message is professional. You know what to do. Click is a horrible message to have on your phone when an employer is the one calling you, because quite likely they might just do the click without leaving a message. I've heard so many inappropriate things when I've called job seekers before that. It's that first impression again, it really hurts you. You make sure your greeting is polished. Not just make sure it's very professional, very good, very nice sounding. Something that's going to really create that positive impact. Stand up or sit straight when you're on the phone. And we talked about make sure your surroundings are serene. Smile when you're on the phone is another great thing to say. When you talk on the phone, you can tell when somebody's frowning. You can tell when weirdly enough, you can tell when somebody's slouching. Stand up, sit up straight, smile into the phone. Your voice will reflect that, and it will create that great first impression like we've been talking about. Have a pen and a calendar within reach. Or if you do that on your cell phone, whatever it is you have, or a tablet, have that handy so that if they talk to you, you're very nervous already, have those things in front of you so that you can write down when the interview is. If you can find out, ask those questions about how many people will you be interviewing with. Those kind of questions will really help you. So, and then also, again, know your resume. Makes sense to have your resume with you. Whenever you're going to be doing this, have your resume around so that if they do ask a particular question, and it's actually happened to job seekers I've known in the past, you can not be put on the spot and have an answer ready, hopefully. So as the interview nears, one of the biggest things, and this actually, I have a lot of stories, but one of the stories I had a job seeker, applied for a job. It was kind of by some mills here in town in Longview, and the mills are surrounded by railroad tracks. They didn't take that into account when they planned the route. They went their normal way. They would drive to that company, which went right across a major railroad crossing. They were planning to get there 15 minutes before the interview, which is what it should be, and that day a very long train was coming through. They ended up being 15 minutes late for what was the most important interview in their life, and that basically ended the interview right there. So know your route, know backup routes. If you can, drive the route once or twice so that you know, how am I going to get there? How long is it going to take? Is there any obstacles in my way? Construction, trains like we just talked about, so that you're not going to be surprised and made nervous your first time. Hygiene is huge. Clean, obvious, right? Perfumed, lightly only. A lot of people have allergies to certain kinds of scents, and if you do that, if you come in perfumed up, cologned up, too much hairspray that has a lot of odor, people are going to notice that, and what they're going to be focusing on is what you looked like, what you smelled like, and not what answers you gave them, which is the important part. Light makeup and jewelry also falls in that line. Appropriate clothing, and people ask, what is appropriate clothing? I usually tell people, one step above what you'd wear at the job. If you're going to a construction site, you're going to wear jeans, heavy work pants, some kind of sweater or a t-shirt or something like that. So for an interview, your best pair of pants, possibly a polo shirt, something you don't want to, what I'm saying is you wouldn't want to go in a three-piece suit. You want to go in one step above what you'd normally wear. And nails, work length, manicured, teeth brushed, things like that. And also, if you smoke, some people do that for nerves. I understand that. Gum chewing is another thing that people, gum chewing is not so bad if you spit the gum out before you get in, because that won't linger when you walk in. Cigarette smoke, unfortunately, lingers. And I had a resume on my desk from somebody that applied for a job years ago, and I still remember this to this day. The smoke was so bad, they must have smoked in their car quite a bit, and the resume was left over in there for a while. The resume came to my desk 3 days after they applied for the job. I could still heavily smell the cigarette smoke on their resume. It could be a negative first impression. So, and then the next thing is select an outfit. We already talked about how you should dress, but I tell people when I talk to them about interviews, select it the night before at least. You don't want to be scrambling half an hour until I have to get the interview. It's a 20-minute drive, and now what am I going to wear? So choose those things ahead of time. And again, a lot of what we're going to talk about today are what I call no-duh comments. They're common sense, right? Except common sense is only common sense if it's something you've had a lot of practice with, if it's something that you've done many times or that you've learned about in class, or if you've really thought about too much and you have the experience to think about it. It's not common sense if this is your first interview. It's not common sense if this is something that's very infrequent for you. So really, plan this out. So, keep in mind, first impressions, and we've talked about that a few times, first impressions matter. I mean, we've all heard that there's only one chance to make a first impression. It's very true. So think about those things when you're walking in the door and you're smiling, you're shaking hands, you're repeating names in the greeting when you first meet the people. And one thing to also remember is you're going to be nervous when you first come in here for an interview. You come to talk to people, you're very nervous. So are they. Sometimes the people that are hiring you are just as nervous because their company could be on the line. Whether their company succeeds or fails, their job could be on the line. If they're an HR person, they want to make sure they're they're investing in their company, and you are an investment in that company. You want to show that. And another thing I tell people when I say relax, which kind of sounds counterintuitive, is that you are nervous, but you have to remember one thing. You got an interview. So that means that they must have seen something in you that they thought was worth investing in. That's why they brought you there. Companies don't bring in 100 people to interview. So when they do that, it's really important that you remember they saw something in you, and so that should give you some solace. So there could be tests, and this is something to think about. When you're going through this, I know I've known hundreds of students and adults as well that when they hear the word test or assessment, they instantly the palms get sweaty. Instantly the pulse goes up, the breathing quickens. It's a natural response. Fight or flight kicks in at that point. And what you have to remember is being prepared, and that's that practice part again. I've said that a few times. Practice really does help when you prepare, when you're getting ready for an interview, because if all of a sudden somebody says test, you're ready for it. Or if you've asked questions when they first called you to show that you're interested, one of those questions could be, will there be any tests? How many people will be in the interview? I had an example of a job seeker. She was interviewing for an elementary school teacher. She went to the interview thinking it'll probably be the principal, maybe another teacher or two, possibly the principal's secretary. She walked into a room with 40 people. The school board wanted to show up. The PTA members wanted to show up. Grade level teachers, all of the principals from every school in the district. She was surrounded literally by people interviewing her. Only a few people asked the question, but talk about stage fright. That's one of those things, if you ask before the interview gets there, you'll be a little more prepared to do well. And this fourth bullet's a huge one. When you are driving up, getting out of your car, this could be the first part of your interview. You could be evaluated right there. So remember, not only the people that are in the interview room, you make that decision. They could be watching you walk in. They could be the person that greets you when you come in and check in for the interview. Or, as in another story, I had a gentleman that had a job interview. He went to the job 15 minutes early. He felt prepared. He checked in. They had him, okay, have a seat. They'll be with you in a few minutes. Somebody sat down next to him in jeans and a button-up shirt, quite kind of like what I have on now. And they just started chatting. And he chatted back with the person. It didn't seem that odd. It happens all the time, right? They called him for the interview. He stood up, walked back with the people. That person stood up and walked behind him, walked into the interview room and kind of sat in a corner. And the interviewers introduced themselves, hands were shook, everything went great, and then they pointed and said, by the way, this is our president. The first part of the interview had happened while he was sitting in the lobby. So be prepared when you walk in, when you get out of your car for that first time, that assume that the interview's begun. Eye contact. This is one of those skills that takes practice too. And when you're making eye contact, it shows a lot of things about you. It shows you're confident. It can show some people, if you're avoiding eye contact, honesty could be coming to question when you're answering questions to them and you're not looking them in the eye. And it can show so much, and it's a practice skill, and you want to really make sure you keep that in mind when you're here. And also your posture. It's so easy to sit in a chair and slouch, or to lean to one side or cock your head. Especially if you're nervous, you might not even be paying attention to that. Again, that's where practice comes into play. Think about your posture. If you're somebody, and you probably know it's like me, that talks with their hands, you may want to keep a piece of paper, kind of like I am now. Keep that resume in your hand so you have your resume handy, and also you're not going to be waving your hands madly about so that they're not focused on you again. And nervousness. People have all kinds of nervous behaviors. I've seen people that are pin clickers. I've seen people, again, that talk with their hands. I've seen people that have facial tics. They giggle when they get nervous. Keep those things, if you keep that in mind, it's a little easier to keep it in check, because those things can really distract the employer from what's important. What to bring? You think to an interview, what would I bring? That's actually a really important thing. You'd want to make sure you have a pen and paper, definitely your resume. You have your resume with you. Bring copies if you need to, so that maybe if you want to hand them out so that they can refer to something, you have that prepared. If you have any other materials, one of our workshops on portfolios is an excellent thing to do. If you have examples of your work or everything, have that with you so that you can invite them to look at that, possibly after an interview or during an appropriate question. Recognition awards, specialty training, these are all things that make up a portfolio. And the other thing, like I said, the paper or whatever you have keeps your hands free and it keeps you focused. And if you get nervous during a question and forget something, which will happen, you have that paper to look down and refer to again when you're doing this. Those are very, very important things to have with you. Now, what shouldn't you bring? And this is, again, I have a laundry list of times I've seen things that have been no-nos and that have really made a difference to people. So what you shouldn't bring: gum, food, candy. Oh, look at that. You shouldn't bring your cell phone. So that is something you really want to be careful with. Thank you, Heather. This happened exactly like that during an interview I was in. We had a young man. You could tell this mattered to him. This job meant something. It was at WorkSource, so social service. He had a passion for helping people. About midway through the interview, his phone went off just like that. And from that point on, he was so flustered that he basically talked himself out of the job. It interrupted his flow. It interrupted his concentration. It was something that the people noticed. We would have probably looked past it, but he wasn't even willing to look past it. It could be something that's a killer. Large purses or backpacks. Again, you should have maybe a peachy folder with those materials I talked about. Does anybody have peachies anymore? A folder of some kind. But have just a bare minimum with you. And the last one: people, parents, children, friends. This is another true story. Gentleman went in for an interview. His wife accompanied him. Okay, support is a great thing. I'm not against support. She went in. She not only drove with him, she walked into the business, sat down with him in the lobby after he checked in. She actually walked up to check in with him. And then when the interviewers came and said, hey, would you follow us? We're excited to meet you. He actually tried to bring his wife into the interview room. So very negative, very bad first impression, cost him the job. All right, so next. Now, we've got to that, past that before the interview and right leading up to the interview. Now the interview begins. What do I do? What can I expect? And this is really the part where the dread begins. People are nervous leading up to the interview. Once they walk into that room and it begins, this is where some people, without preparation, lose it. So, one thing is good to note that might help you is the stages of an interview. So, during an interview, it usually comes in about 4 different stages. Introduction, opening. This is when you shake the hands. This is when you make that key first impression. Handshakes. Most people think they know a handshake, but really, what's it about? Handshake is generally just a few seconds. You don't want to overpower them. This isn't the chance to really, you don't want to make that crushing impression. You want to make that professional, confident expression. It should be 2 to 3 seconds in length. It should be firm, but not overly firm. And you don't want to do anything where it's a fadeaway handshake, or it shows that you're not confident. I've actually seen ones where they're already pulling away by the time they do that. And it's really, this is a practice skill also. Next, after you meet that, they'll say their names. Really good time to repeat those names back or write them down. That's why you have a pen and paper, right? Write those down because it's going to help show that you're interested, and it's also going to be great during the end when you want to thank those people and maybe write them a thank you note, which we'll talk about later. The next you generally move right into questions. Sometimes they kind of talk about the job and give a brief, this is what this is about. And after that, it jumps into questions. There's 3 types of questions. General questions. And these are just to get to know a little bit about you. These are going to be maybe about your work history. These are going to be about maybe some of the things you have on your resume that they want to know about, and then some things like that. Position questions are going to be very specific. How familiar are you with this particular program, with this tool, working with this type of product or customer? Those are generally a little easier to answer. The third, though, is the one that gets the most people. The situational questions. Tell me about a time that you've dealt with someone who's upset, where you've worked with coworkers that aren't pulling their load. These are the questions that are very difficult to answer on the fly. And so we're going to talk about later on in this presentation some of the types of questions that are commonly asked. And I'm going to actually share with you some other places you can go to actually find more of these. So the next part is conclusion. This is a very simple part. Thank you for your time. And this is where they'll tell you this is over. And they ask the important question, do you have any questions for us? And we'll go over some, actually a little later in this, some questions you can actually ask people. But this is an important part. Saying, no, I'm good, or I don't have any at the moment, might imply that you're not interested. You're going to be nervous, so it's really easy to blank. That's why I tell people, try to come up with a couple questions that you can ask them at the very end. It really does make a difference. It really does show that you want the job, which is what it's all about, right? And then the last part, which actually, testing. This could be last. I've actually had it where they test the people before the interview starts. So you want to actually be prepared for that test so that you know. If you know that test is coming, you can combat your anxieties, you can be prepared, and it'll be the most helpful for you. So, like I said up here, that's good to know. But how do I answer the questions? That's really what most people come to an interview module about. That's why most people look up for help on interviews is, yes, I understand all these stages, but how do I answer the questions? And that's a really important thing. There's a few different things we're going to talk about. One is nonverbal communication. We talked about handshakes. We talked about eye contact. Those are 2 very big ones. Posture was another one that we mentioned earlier. How you say something. And again, remember earlier I talked about smiling on the phone? There's a reason. It's a nonverbal communication kind of aid. When you smile, your voice changes. And if you don't believe me, try it sometime. Look in the mirror, say something normally, and then smile and say it, and see what that difference feels like. Those kind of things go very, very far. Tone of voice, how loud your voice is. If you're sitting across the desk from 2 people interviewing you, Your voice probably won't be as loud as I'm talking now. If you're in a room like that one I told you about where she was in a room with 40 other people, we're going to have to amp it up a little because you don't want people straining to hear what you have to say and maybe missing that one key thing that gets you the job. So those are nonverbal. The next thing I want to talk about is actually hearing what they're saying. You're already nervous. They're going to ask a lot of questions. They might even ask you, oh, God forbid, a 2 or 3 part question. How would you go about doing that? It's all okay to repeat back what they say. What I heard you say is this. Let me answer that. It's also a great idea possibly to write down the questions. Ask them, is it all right if I write this down to help me form my answers? They're more than likely going to either say yes, or they might even hand you a copy of the questions that you'd want to give back at the end. They like to keep those. But hearing the question and what they're actually, and this also, there's one part too that is actually thinking about what they're saying. Don't just start answering a question because you're afraid of any kind of pause. A pause isn't a bad thing. When you're hearing the question, it shows the employer that you're actually thinking about the answer and you're wanting to give your best answer. If you just start spouting something off, there's a really good chance that you won't actually ask what they're trying to get at. You won't answer, what they're trying to get at. And that's why hearing is a skill. It's something that you really want to develop. If you practice with someone around you, if you're not sure, when you're practicing, have a family member ask you an interview question. There are online sources, which I'll talk about at the end, where you can actually do practice interviews online. And you can actually have a computer ask you questions as you're going. And that's a really good way to hear a question. The next thing is you see 4 letters there, STAR, STAR. This is an acronym: situation, task, action, and result. It's no good if I ask you, have you ever done this? Have you ever worked with a difficult customer? Yes. Did I tell the employer anything? You want to really make sure that when you're asking a question, you give them an answer they can qualify, that they can weigh, and that they can measure up against maybe other applicants or the job description that they have. So that's where STAR comes in. You want to tell them about what situation you've experienced. If I asked you, when have you dealt with a difficult customer, have a situation ready. And that's, again, where we plan this beforehand and practice this beforehand. Have a situation in mind already where you've worked with a difficult customer or a difficult employee, where you've had some kind of argument or conflict with someone. And then don't just say that. I had someone that actually answered an interview. We asked her, when have you dealt with a difficult customer? And she had a great example of a customer that came to her register. All these things, she talked about how angry they got. Here's her response was, I got the manager. He was asked to leave the store. He got mad and threw something through the window. Very memorable story. I never forgot. That was probably about 10 years ago that I heard this example in an interview. I haven't forgotten it, obviously, but what did it tell me about her? Did it show that she has any skills? Did it show me that did she do anything that highlighted what her skills and abilities are? No, it was very memorable, but it didn't tell me why I should want to hire you. And then action, task and action kind of go together a little bit. What did you do? I did this. I tried this. I thought about this, and I went through these steps to make sure I remedied the situation. And then always talk about the result. What happened as a result? Productivity went up. The customer went away satisfied. Some kind of numbers, if you have them, are always great because those are something people can remember. And so you want to always remember that. STAR is having examples and stories. Speaking in stories isn't always a bad thing. It can actually help show that employer what you have to offer. All right, so now what we're going to do now is talk about some of the questions that they could ask. We're not going to go in depth in all of these. We just don't have the time today. I'm sorry. This is one of these things where if you did want to learn more, you'd come in and see one of us. You'd talk to a career specialist here at LCC in the Career Center, and we could actually give you some resources to help you answer those questions that are really very common and that you can prepare for and can get ready for. So, the most common one, tell me about yourself. I've heard it in different forms. Why would you like to work for us? What makes you a good fit with this company? I've even had it so bluntly asked to someone as, why should we hire you over everybody else? Those are all a perfect opportunity to have a prepared speech talking about what are my skills? What are my abilities? What do I bring? Why am I a good fit with this company? And that's with every question. You want to talk about why What kind of skills, abilities, and knowledge do you have that would make you the right person for this job, or the right person for them to take that risk on investing in? And this, again, without practice, tell me about yourself very easily becomes, and I've heard this in interviews, they start talking about their hobbies, their family, all the other things that don't matter, and don't tell me why I should hire you. So you want to really be careful when you do that to prepare and be ready for that tell me about yourself style question. The other ones are, what are your strengths and weaknesses? And I'm going to talk about a couple of these, but what are your strengths and weaknesses? This is really, most people can talk about their strengths fairly easily. And the only time people have trouble is, I don't want to brag about myself. Well, that's the whole purpose of an interview. You want to talk about yourself and what strengths you have. Just as important on the flip side, though, is what are your weaknesses? Telling an employer that I don't have any shows me that either you're hiding something from me, or you're not even honest enough with yourself to give me a good answer. Don't try to be tricky when you answer these questions. Always be very honest and always be very just forthright. And what I tell people is, if you're going to say something that's a weakness, that's weakness, or if they ask a question, you've quit or been fired from a job, and they ask you, why did you leave your last job? And I actually worked with a job seeker yesterday about this. Why did you leave your last job? She was let go. And it was something that was completely beyond her control, but it's something you don't really like to talk about. It's one of those negative things. It's really easy to say something that makes you look really good or glosses over something bad, but instead talk about why it's a learning experience, why it's something that's helped you grow, or why it's not going to be an issue for them, which is a really important thing. If there's something in the past that has been on your application or resume that may kind of be a red flag for them, talk about it in a way that shows why it won't be a problem for them. The best way to answer a question. Why should we hire you? Why this company? Describe your greatest achievements and what are your goals? Goals are very important. Again, be very careful here. You want to show you're fit for that job. You don't want to talk about how you are going for HR and you're interviewing with the HR manager. They might not take too kindly to that. So instead, talk about how you are going to be a good fit for that position and how you see yourself growing into that position, because that's going to really help show them that you're the right person that we should pick. A few other common questions. How did you plan your activities for this week? That's not as common, but it has been asked. They might ask what they're trying to find out. And again, whenever you're asked a question, ask yourself, what are they trying to figure out? What do they want to know? What are they really asking? It's that part of that listening that we talked about earlier. They want to know, what are your planning? What are your scheduling? What are your organizational skills? That's what they're getting after. So when you answer these questions, speak to it like that. Tell me about a situation where you had an issue with or a conflict. We've already brought up that one. Where you had poor communication. Another one, tell me about a time you failed or where you didn't have enough time to finish a task or a project. It's happened to everybody at some time in their life. Be ready to talk about it and be honest. Talk about what you learned and what you gained from those processes. That's the easiest way to answer all those negative questions, is what you've done and what you've learned. And tell me about the toughest decision you had to make on your job and which you've had to adapt to changes. These are all examples of soft skills, about things that the employer can't teach. How well can you adapt to change? How well do you communicate with others? How do you handle conflict? These are important things to highlight. You can't really highlight them as well in a resume, or in a cover letter. The interview is where all those things come out, where you start talking about, in particular, what are those skills that you had. Another thing to tell me about, making mistakes, reacted to a colleague who maybe has stole something or regularly leaves early. What they're trying to do is another soft skill. What are your morals? What are your ethics, your work ethics like? Be prepared to talk about those things, because I remember reading this survey not too long ago that was done in Washington. They interviewed about 1,000 employers. And what they were talking about, what are the most important things you look for in a new employee? They gave a list. The top 5 weren't even job skills. They weren't, you had to have a certain amount of experience, you had to have this kind of knowledge. They were all those soft skills. And by soft skills, I mean those things that can't really be taught, like your work ethic, your communication, your ability to be a part of a team. Those are the things that employers are looking for, so make sure you highlight those. If you're worried you don't have a lot of experience, highlight those skills that you do bring that will make you really stand out and get noticed. So, the last part, the conclusion. They often end, like I said before, do you have any questions for us? And remember I said I would kind of share some ones with you that might be helpful. Here's a few things you could say. What are the immediate priorities of this job? What would you, how does this position interface with the objective that you have for your company or your department? Some kind of question that you've thought out ahead of time that's really going to show that you don't want to ask what the pay's like. What are the benefits? That shows me you're thinking about something other than doing a great job. Another thing I did, I sometimes turn it back, be very careful when you do this, but I asked them if I was hired. I actually asked in an interview, I use this personally when I applied for this job here at the college. If I'm successful at this job, where would you see me a year from now? To show that I'm looking forward and that I'm actually thinking about doing a good job, which is important, right? So that question showed the employer that I'm already thinking ahead and I'm envisioning myself in this job and that I'm envisioning myself doing it well. So that's always a really good thing to have. And then the last part, it's really easy when you're nervous to forget to say thank you. Our moms, I'm a parent, and my wife and I both remind our children, hey, remember to say thank you. Remember to say thank you. It's a very simple thing, but it's very powerful, very profound. It shows them that you appreciate the time they spent out of their day. It shows them that you are, again, interested and you're honored for being that interview. And then the next part of that is after you leave. And that's why, remember I said before, repeat the names of the people interviewing, and if you can, write them down, because then you can do that final thank you step, which is writing a thank you letter. A lot of times people, what they do to make sure they don't forget anything is walking out to their car, having those letters ready, and then writing the letter and putting it in an envelope and bringing it back up to the front desk and saying to whoever received you in the reception area, thank you, I want to thank you again for this opportunity. Could you give these to the names of the people that you talked with? And then that way you've taken care of that final thank you and you've made a huge impression. So do not use generic phrases or just have something so prepared already that it looks like it's a Hallmark postcard. You want this to seem real and authentic. Ooh, spinny. So this is the end of this presentation. Again, interviewing is tough. This is the hardest thing you're going to do in a job search. You don't have to do it alone. Up on the board is our website address here in Career Services at Lower Columbia College. Feel free to check us out. We have some resources on there, including LCC Career Connections, which is our software that we use that has everything from a resume builder to a mock interview program that you can launch that actually you program the questions. You pick the questions out of literally hundreds. You pick the interviewer, and it records you answering the questions. And you can watch them back. You can share them with us. You can share them with a friend and get that feedback that's really going to help make your interview a more relaxed experience where you can highlight who you are and what you bring instead of worrying about, I have to get this job, I have to get this job, I'm so nervous. Okay, on the screen is a resource for you. It's our website here at LCC Career Services. On that, you'll find a lot of the things we've talked about today, and you'll also find a link to create your own free account for LCC Career Connections, which is a site we use that has everything from a resume builder, cover letter builder. It has sites where you can research jobs, research careers, and learn a little bit more about what are some of those keywords and phrases that you're going to want to mention in an interview. And it also has a mock interview module, which is something where you can pick an interviewer, pick questions in the career fields you're looking for, and actually have it videotape you and interact, and you can watch it back and see, did I slouch? Did I lean? Did I stutter? Did I talk too softly? You can share it with us. You can share it with others so that we can give you feedback and help build your confidence for this most important step in your job seeking process. Again, thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll see you here at the Career Center.